everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Catherine Lommer's Guide to Life podcast. Okay, so this week I'm looking at the disappearance of Melanie Hall. So I started looking at this one straight after looking at the murder of Lynn Trenholm, the Pinky's murder in Chester. Now, I don't know why I started looking at this one directly after. I don't know, sometimes you subconsciously link things in your mind, don't you? And then it turned out when I was going through all the detail that she was actually killed she disappeared, but then they think that she was probably killed on the same night she disappeared, which is the 9th of June, which is exactly the same date, okay, that Lynn Trenholm was killed. And so only it was 5 years later. Now, both were petite, blonde hair. They both worked as clerks as well. So there's quite a little bit of similarity about both of them. One thing that I will comment on is the fact that Melanie's murder has provoked quite a lot of publicity because she was obviously a psychology graduate. And so she came from a different background. And also, whereas Lynn, on the other hand, worked in a massage parlour. So, you know, at the end of the day, both of these people are human beings. They're both women who have been killed by somebody who is still out there. So, you know, it's only fair that Lynn should have just as much publicity as the other, despite the fact of where she worked or who she was or what she did. You know, I've got a little bit of an issue with that, as you can tell. But hey, I am one to kind of speak my mind. Now, I just came back to Lynn's for a minute because when I was kind of reviewing Melanie's after I'd recorded Lynn's, I kind of thought, oh, there's a bit of a connection there. And so Chester's a really, really small place. And it's a tiny town. Everybody's linked to each other. There's about 3 degrees of separation. You know, in that time, I just left school, I think. I just left school. And but I couldn't walk through the town without people kind of like waving to me, saying hello. Or you go out to nightclubs and go to the pub and you'd see the same groups of people all of the time. And we'd know each other and we'd know what they did. And, you know, and it's that kind of place. So just to give you an example, it hasn't actually changed a massive amount to this day. So, for example, my boyfriend and I went to the theatre a few weeks ago and he actually saw 2 people he knew, and he's not even from Chester. He's from, outside. And then I came back from living in Ayrshire and Arran in Scotland. Okay, I thought, right, okay, I've kind of lost touch with all my school friends and all my horsey friends, so I'll join a group of new friends group. And then I went there. I met 2 people who knew my parents. One of whom I knew when I was 15, and then I met somebody else who used to live in the house directly behind my parents' house, but she moved out before they moved in. So it is that kind of place, you know. There's all these bizarre connections to each other. So I found it really strange that nobody said anything. There were no rumours. That no one was kind of like, there was no gossip or, you know, nothing came to light because it's just not that kind of place. You know, nothing really kind of goes unnoticed here. You know, so there may be a link, there may not be, but, you know, one thing that I kind of thought, well, it's probably in June, it's quite warm, it's quite likely to be, maybe a tourist. Another thing that's been linked is there was a link on Crimewatch to Melanie Hall, and they said that someone overheard a conversation on a canal boat not too far from, I think, where her parents were from. And basically it was a woman saying, what did you do to Melanie? You know? So you kind of think, this was like maybe a couple of weeks afterwards. Well, it might be something or nothing. Okay, but then I would think, well, let's say it was something, why would that woman ask that question of that man unless she suspected him of doing something else? Again, might be nothing. I'm just speculating. It just kind of occurred to me. You know, because it's kind of worth looking at after all this time, because sometimes when people look at things again, they maybe see other things that people maybe didn't notice or didn't think about. It's always good to have like a fresh pair of eyes looking at things and asking various different questions. Now, one thing I did notice as well when I was having a look and I thought, canal boats, do you know what? Pinky's is just over the road from the canal. And, working on a boat is quite tough. You might actually go for a massage also. there are, people out there who probably don't have a lot of money who kind of live on canal boats. So it's, it's not a big stretch to think that that might be a link. And then also, say Melanie was found wrapped in bin bags and tied with blue rope, which was 4 millimeters. So it's not the standard rope that you would have for mooring canal boats. It's usually a lot thicker than that. However, like most equestrians, I have in the boot of my car some baling twine. We use it for everything. It's really handy. Along with I haven't got a pair of wellies, but I will be for the winter. Gloves, hats, scarves, additional layers, spare pair of socks in case your feet get wet. So you kind of think, well, who would have easy access, possibly even in their car, to blue rope? And it would be, a boater is quite likely to have blue rope in their car. Anything sort of possible. Another thing as well is the location that Melanie was found. It was slipway over motorway, and people. I did say, someone would have had to have known where all the cameras were. That's true, but like back in 1991, we weren't really aware of CCTV. No one really paid much attention to it at all. And also, if they're thinking, which it was the case, that she wouldn't be found for a long time, then the chances are all the footage has been erased anyway. So you'd kind of think, because like maybe saying, who would kind of spot a vehicle at the side of the road, or side of the slipway? Well, how many times, maybe not so much now, but certainly when I was driving in that sort of age, had I passed my test then? Probably. But, how many times have you been driving around and you have seen a car pulled over the side of the road with a guy standing there looking as if he's going for a pee, even on motorway slipways? Yeah. And you kind of drive that past sort of thinking, oh, he's been caught short. And you don't think anything of it at all, do you? And then it just completely goes out of your mind. I remember I used to live in a house off a dual carriageway. And the amount of people that we got in vans, or cars, they'll pull off onto our country lane and they'd go for a pee in the hedge thinking that no one could see them. Well, sorry, wait, news for you guys, I could see you. And I was like, oh, shall I let the dogs out and let them kind of go, oh. I did do it a couple of times. A little bit naughty, but, you can be seen, especially in the countryside. So maybe it was somebody who understood that you could be seen in the countryside, and the best place to hide something is actually in a really, really busy area. Because, so it's possible, it's not actually too much of a stretch to think, well, it is somebody who spends a lot of time in the countryside and understands that everything in the countryside is seen, because you think that, oh, there's nothing happens in the countryside, I can get away with anything and leave anything. Well, certainly areas, yeah, you can. But quite often things are seen and things are noticed. So, it just seems a bit of a coincidence. Also, it's really easy to sort of disappear on the canals. That's where a lot of, if you kind of go along them and spend any time on them, as I have done, then you'll see like there are some really nice boats, but who will go, kind of like people who maybe spend half the year on a canal boat and half the year in the sun, which is a pretty good idea to me. But there are also people who don't have a lot of money, and that's, how they can afford to live. So there's kind of a different kind of element, on there. So let's have a think, shall we? And have a look. So Melanie Hall's Disappearance, it's covered on Crimewatch, which is available on YouTube, and it was really interesting. I've watched that. I also watched a documentary, 90-minute documentary on Channel 5 called The Body in the Bag, Murder of Melanie Hall. Which was really interesting, and I'd recommend you go and have a look at it, go and watch it. But here's the kind of main story, right? So Melanie Hall was a 25-year-old philosophy graduate, and she was taking a year out after her degree course, and she was working in the hospital as a clerk. And her boyfriend was a doctor at the hospital, seeing him for a few months, and they went to a barbecue, and they went to a barbecue with a couple of friends. Now, they were having such a fantastic time. They were getting on so well, and having a great night, that they then, 4 of them, went to Cadillac's nightclub in Bath, and when they kind of like, so they could kind of go clubbing and enjoy themselves. Now, Melanie had packed all her stuff up, and she was supposed to be staying at her boyfriend's house for the weekend, and she'd left all her stuff at his house for the weekend. Now, her boyfriend was a doctor at the hospital, and he saw her dancing with another man, okay, who gave her a kiss. And he was a bit upset by this. Well, I don't know, I don't know. So the police have questioned him and they discounted him. But for me, that just seems a bit odd, doesn't it? I mean, why A, would Melanie be dancing with another guy if she was having such a good time with her boyfriend at the barbecue? Why would she then be dancing with another guy in a nightclub? Okay, and why would the guy, the doctor, okay, not go up and say, excuse me, that's my girlfriend, move out the way? Or say, what are you doing? You know, so unless he was maybe a little bit insecure, I would possibly say, maybe. So that, I don't know, that just seems a bit, I don't know, it seems a bit strange. You know, why would you do that? You know, and why would she be kissing another guy in a nightclub when, when she was clearly having a really good time with her partner? I mean, thinking about it, if I kind of so I packed all my stuff up, say today, and I'm going off to my boyfriend's house for the weekend, right? And we're actually going out on Saturday night. Now, if all my stuff's there, the last thing I'm going to want to do is annoy my boyfriend. I certainly wouldn't want it if he went off to the bar, and I met an old friend and said, oh, hi, and gave him a kiss on the cheek. That kind of makes logical sense. He would come up to me and he would say, oh, who's this then? He'd probably come up to me, give me a kiss on the cheek and hug and cuddle me and kind of make a point that I'm with him. And then, he'd ask who this was, and which we're like, oh, it's an old friend. We're just having a bit of a chat, haven't seen him for years. So I just don't understand why the boyfriend didn't do that. The only reason you wouldn't do that is if you're really insecure, okay? Really insecure. Because you kind of would. And also, something about his behaviour flags up a red flag for me. And bear in mind, the police have discounted this. However, then what he did was he said that he saw Melanie kissing another guy, okay? And at that point, he then left the nightclub without saying anything to her, which I find a bit strange, because at the end of the day, if someone's your girlfriend, if you care for them, surely you'd say, right, I've seen you kissing this guy, I'm not very happy about it, I'm going to go and have a cigarette in the car. That seems a bit strange, but instead he went and he did some attention-seeking behaviour, okay? And he stomped out and he sat in the car, had a cigarette, and then when she didn't follow him out there, he drove off and left her. That just seems a little bit, I don't know, something about that is, I just don't like it. And I can't quite put my finger on why that might be. Because also he's kind of making Melanie look bad by saying that she was kissing another man. But the friends clearly didn't know anything about this in the nightclub. There wasn't any big scene. I remember when this has actually happened to me. I was in a situation when a boyfriend was actually, I came across him snogging another girl in a nightclub and we were going out with each other at the same time. I just grabbed a pint of beer, or was it my pint of beer, and chucked it over both of them, made my point. That was it, relationship over. Because that's kind of what you would do. Well, maybe it's not what other people would do, but I don't know. I just think that's insecurity and attention-seeking behaviour, which is a little bit narcissistic, just putting that out there. That's, I don't know. So her friends then realised that Melanie's boyfriend had left the club, and they said goodbye to Melanie without knowing that her boyfriend had gone. Well, they didn't say goodbye to him to find him to say goodbye to him. So do they not like him for some reason? If they just said goodbye to her. It would have been interesting to see what the friends thought of the boyfriend at the time. Anyway, he's been discounted, but I'm just flagging this up because something about it just doesn't add up to me. So, as I say, Melanie was supposed to be spending the weekend with the doctor that she was seeing. Family weren't aware that she was missing until she didn't turn up on Monday. Well, this is somebody that's a doctor. He's got medical training. He also understands how to make a scene sterile. And he's had quite a lot of time, if it was him, for at least two days to clean up any evidence of anything. Now, also, as I say, her boyfriend was initially this suspect, and he has been discounted, and they did go through the fine detail with him. But some people are really clever. And say Melanie had left all her stuff at his house. So you're kind of like thinking to yourself, well, she was last seen talking to somebody for about 40 minutes at the entrance by a bouncer, because it was at the entrance because a bouncer saw her, and they usually stand at the door, don't they? So you kind of think, and also the cameras were on her. Was a camera on her at the door? I can't quite remember. But anyway, you kind of think to yourself, well, why was she sat there? She was probably waiting for her boyfriend, wasn't she? So that way she didn't realise that anything was wrong with him. She didn't realise that she'd done anything wrong. Okay. There was no justification for his actions. It was probably an innocent thing that had happened. So she'd obviously kind of like had a discussion with him. She hadn't had a discussion with him. She didn't know where he was. She assumed he was in the nightclub somewhere. She hadn't found him. She was probably waiting for him. So that would indicate to me that she hadn't done anything wrong, or she didn't think that she'd done anything wrong. So you kind of all then think, well, was what that her boyfriend saw, was that then just his imagination? Did he see more into the situation than was actually there? I don't know, just putting that out there. And it does seem a bit strange that so then what would she do? Okay. What would you do? You're in a nightclub. You've realised you're on your own. You know your friends have left. Her friends hadn't said goodbye to her boyfriend, which I think is a bit strange, which would indicate maybe they didn't like him that much because they didn't bother trying. Although they've liked him. They've tried to find him and they couldn't find him. But then if they tried to find him and they couldn't find him, why would they not say to Melanie, oh, we've tried to find X, but we can't find him anywhere. Can you say goodbye to him for us? I don't know. Maybe that's the case. Who knows? But then at that point, wouldn't you kind of then think, well, actually, is he still here? Do you want to check? So I don't know. It's just, yeah. So it's just something, maybe something and nothing. So Melanie was seen talking to somebody in a brown shirt at the end of the night. But you have to kind of think, what would you do if you were Melanie? Okay, you've realised your boyfriend's probably left the club. Would you get a taxi to his house and say, excuse me, why have you left the club, or you've disappeared? Or would you go home? And that's the question. There were no kind of like taxis there. Police have checked and there was no sort of record of her being picked up in a taxi. I mean, there's a possibility that her boyfriend did go back or did wait in the club for her. She was seen arguing, getting into somebody's car. Well, was it his car? Did he actually say, right, I'm here? And is that why because she was also seen arguing with somebody. So my question is, right, you've met somebody that you kind of know a little bit, or a bit in the nightclub, in reception. Okay. You're chatting to them. Okay. And we're like, why would you then have an argument with them outside? That doesn't make sense to me. And surely if her friends had found her and seen her dancing with the person, would they not have asked who he was? Or if it was a friend, they would have known who he was. Would there not have been that conversation? It's like, oh, who's that you're dancing with? Where's your boyfriend? And it's just like, well, I just don't get why, if you'd met a stranger, because at the end of the day, when we meet people we don't know, we're usually really nice to them, aren't we? We're kind of putting on our best face. So I just don't understand why you'd argue with a stranger, unless, of course, you wouldn't leave her alone and she was trying to get a taxi home and is being annoying. But then there's ways to get away from people. So I don't know. There's just a whole lot of questions about the whole thing that just don't really kind of stack up for me. But anyway, so there's a guy apparently talking to her in a sort of a brown shirt. But then we've also got the possible link with the canal boat, which is maybe or maybe not. I don't know. And they say that, so there's all sorts of things. They've looked at everything. You know, there was a probation hospital near to the nightclub. And there was a guy called Christopher Clark, who was an early bird rapist, and he used to watch people's houses and wait until the husband had gone to work before going in. There's also a Batman rapist who was prevalent in the area because he dropped a Batman cap at the scene. He'd never been caught, but he let all of his victims go, so decided there was no link for that. There's also, because the possibility that she may have got a taxi with Christopher Halliwell. There's also possibly been a link with Levi Belfield because there were Ford car keys and he drove a Ford. You know, so there's all these kind of like links that they've kind of looked into and sort of discounted. But one thing that is pretty obvious, and it was opportunistic and it wasn't planned, you know. So 13 years later, right, in 2009, so she disappeared in 1996. Her body, remains were found alongside the M5 in Gloucestershire. And they were found in black bin bags in one of the busiest locations in that area. So, again, you know, but people don't stop at the motorway, do they? So it's somebody who's really intelligent. People don't stop at the motorway. You don't stop there. You're never going to stop there, you know? So just question, like, it took so long for her body to be found. Somebody's clearly thought about it and had time to think about it. They haven't just dumped it, you know, so they haven't just killed her and then panicked and dumped the body somewhere. They've actually had time to think about where to put it, you know. And so she was first identified by a ring that she had. And her dad in the press, and I'm going to quote him because it's actually quite hard-hitting, he described having a young, vibrant daughter with her whole future in front of her. And now he has a bag of bones. And his intention was to try and get across to people how awful this was. And he's right, because when you see things on TV or you hear them in the media or you now see them on social media, you know, you're kind of really a bit detached from them. They don't necessarily mean something to you. But this is a real person, okay? It's somebody's daughter, somebody's sister who is very much loved. And she had her whole future in front of her. And she was killed. Somebody killed her and took her life away. And, you know, the whole thing will have affected the whole family. It's a major trauma. And they put the body into a bag and they just dumped it like some discarded piece of rubbish on the motorway. Okay, so it's clearly somebody who doesn't really have any regard for human life. Now, it looks like she was killed on the 9th of June, 1996. So she died from blunt force trauma to the back of her head, and she had facial injuries as well. And she had a broken jaw and a broken cheek and a fractured skull. So this suggests there was clearly a massive element of rage, okay, about her injuries. Because it was to her face. So her face is really personal, isn't it? Okay. If we look at kind of like, you know, the murder of Lynn Trenholm, it's a different kind of crime. You know, we know that she was stabbed, and she was stabbed, the fatal one was in the back, okay? But this was kind of, you know, although that could also indicate a connection to somebody, because I remember reading just the other day, someone who's just been convicted, I can't remember his name, of killing his wife, and she was actually stabbed in the back. So sometimes if you have a real personal connection to someone, you can't actually bear to see their face, okay? So that indicates that it's easier to kill them without actually looking them in the eye. So that indicates a personal connection. So it would indicate that there is a personal connection to the murder person who did kill Lynn Trenholm. But, you know, but there's a lot of rage here. And I would question, did Melanie then remind this person of somebody else? Okay. But they were able to take out their anger and rage on her face. Okay. Because maybe she looked similar. I don't know, you know, it's just kind of like, it's a possibility. As I say, so, I mean, to break someone's jaw, you know, that's a lot of aggression, isn't it? And a fractured skull, that's a lot of aggression. So it sounds as if he's just started punching her. She's clearly tried to run from her and he's whacked her with something on the back of the head, possibly that he had in his boot of his car. I don't know. Now, say, Ford car keys were found close by. And I was like, why would you leave your car keys quite close by? Unless you kind of is a bit of a trophy. I don't quite know. And Melanie was found naked as well. Obviously it was too late to decide if anything had happened, but that's how she was found. I'm just thinking this through logically. Okay, as I say, Melanie, didn't say anything to her friends about her boyfriend having left. So she couldn't have known that he'd gone. And as I say, she didn't say, we've had a big argument, we've been kissing another man. But then why would she have not gone to found him if he was in the nightclub? That's the question I just don't understand. If they've been having such a good time and Melanie was in the nightclub with your boyfriend, why? I just don't understand why you wouldn't kind of say anything. Why would you be dancing with somebody else? I can't get that out of my head. It doesn't seem any logical sense. And why would she not have said to her friends, oh, he's gone home, he's dropped off, I haven't seen him? Unless she kind of wanted to get away from him. I don't know. It just seems a bit strange, that's all. As I say, she is really attractive. Okay, so it's pretty obvious that guys are going to come and chat to her. I remember being in that situation. I'll try and find a picture of me when I was back in 2002. I thought I was pretty ordinary, but actually having a look at a picture of me now, I'm thinking, actually, do you know what? Yeah, probably did have something back then. So you're kind of thinking, well, she is really attractive. So guys are going to come and see her and chat to her. The guy that was chatting to her in the brown shirt by the bouncers at the door, it could have been someone she knew, might not have been. But, clearly she's clearly waited for her boyfriend for 40 minutes. And he doesn't show up and she leaves, So what happens then? Did she go to her boyfriend's house, or did she go to her parents' house? Or did someone offer her a lift? There's loads of if, buts, maybes. And so I'm kind of, I'm kind of going to leave it there because we're nearly at half an hour. I usually, last time I did, I had to kind of fit in a little bit more and pop in an older one, but I'm just going to leave it there because it's 27 minutes in, and I'll do a historical one, maybe for the next one, I'll see. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that's quite a lot to think about, but do go and have a look at the documentary and watch the YouTube channel, because at the end of the day, the more we kind of more publicity we kind of give these things, the more chances are that someone will trigger a memory in something or a suspicion, and that they'll actually come forward and say, do you know what, I think it was X. Okay then, so that's been me, Catherine Lorimer. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll catch you next time.